Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter, and this week on the show, we're going over UFC Vegas 109. It's going down at the Apex Center in Las Vegas. We had some scares this morning on the scales. Looked like people maybe weren't going to make weight. 3 people needed that second try, but they all made it in the end, and we've got a card. It's going down tomorrow. I'm excited to break it down, and if you guys have been rocking with this channel for a long time, then you may remember one of the OGs, one of the absolute best cappers that we've had on the show, a professional among us, Andrew Gombas in the building. Good to have you back, my brother. How are you? It's been a long time, but I know you've been crushing it a little bit more behind the scenes these days, my man. It's great to have you back on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a while, but I'm looking forward to getting into it. I know it's not the best card on paper, but I'm sure we'll find some ways to have some fun.
Never a doubt about that, my brother. I tried to get our Tapology pulled up here in the background, and of course, had technical difficulties. Wouldn't be my show if there wasn't a technical difficulty to start us off. But my brother, we've got a fight to kick off the card that I don't even know what to make of it, my man. This is one of those fights where if I was not in the content space, I would probably not give this any kind of mental energy. But as you know, my man, I do write about the fights as well as talking about the fights. So I have to come up with an opinion for all of these fights. And this is one where it's like gun to your head, make an opinion. I guess if you press me, I look at both these guys as having real clear flaws in their game. You got Cody Brundage. He's got the proven UFC wins, right? Gone out there, done the thing, but you start peeling back the layers like, all right, who did he actually beat? A lot of those guys no longer with the promotion, right? A lot of guys that were kind of fighting for their job. Maybe Julian Marquez not going to be getting the call back again. So you see some of these guys that he's definitely beaten, but maybe they were shown to not be UFC level. And then on the other side, the guys he's losing to, a Bo Nickel, very forgivable loss. And there's many others along that same vein for a Cody Brundage. So I think that the thing that scares you the most is Cody Brundage sometimes checking out of a fight, right? Where he's out there looking like he might have some success, knocks down Adolfo Vieira, then the bad decision-making comes in and the, mistakes. So you see a guy like this priced as a chalk favorite, it's hard for me to click that side just in general, right? On the other side, though, with McConico, multiple knockout losses regionally, didn't really make a great account of himself in his UFC debut against Ruziboev, landed like 6 significant strikes over the course of that fight, went down in a heap as well. So for me, man, there's nothing I want to click in this fight. Normally in a Cody Brundage fight, I pivot away, I grab an under and hope that Cody either finds a way out, knocks the guy out in meme-like fashion. He's done that before. But even in this fight, you're looking at a chalk price to the under as well. And McConico doesn't strike me as like a massive finisher. When he does finish, tends to be a little more accumulative in rounds 2 and 3. So I don't love anything on this fight, Andrew, unless you're going to talk me into something. So I'll kick it to you, my brother. What do you think about this matchup? Anything to like in the 205-pound weight class where we've got these two middleweights meeting?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. You made a lot of great points. Obviously, Brundage has kind of become quite the figure among MMA fans, and his skill set is limited, but I do think he's gotten a little bit better, especially as a striker. He obviously comes from a wrestling background, which I think is his big edge here. I did not like what I saw from McConico's grappling on the regional scenes. I don't think he's technically sound at all there. The main concern, there's a lot of concerns with Brundage, but one I'll bring up for sure is he's had 12 UFC fights now, and all his wins have come in the first round. So I really question his ability to win an extended fight, and I'm not sure he's going to go out there and just make quick work of McConico. I do agree with him being the favorite here. I think you have to, just given the fact that he does have such a big grappling advantage, and McConico, on the regionals has just looked so bad in the grappling. I don't expect him to improve on it at this point in his career. And yeah, I expect Brundage to get it done. But again, it's very I understand if you don't want to trust him as a favorite in the UFC against literally anybody.
Yeah, we definitely see this the same way because I struggle to see Cody winning extended fights. That's why I talked about maybe liking an under type of thing. I've also seen him check out of fights, but when I look at Cody, I never know what I'm going to get from him. I don't know if he's going to come out trying to wrestle. I don't know if he's going to come out swinging haymakers, right? And then to your point, I think he's actually got a decent enough submission game as well. Almost grabbed a choke up on Adolfo Vieira. People will forget, dropped Adolfo in that fight as well. So he has moments, even in the fights where he loses, but he's just a guy where I feel like I don't know what I'm going to get from fight to fight, and that's hard for me at chalk. So I agree with you, like skill for skill. I think Cody's the better fighter, but in extended fights, I don't like his process, and I do think he kind of just gets in his own way. He gets in his own head. You hear his coaches screaming at him, getting on his case. And all those kind of things I don't really like. I don't like when a coach has to tell you 600 times what to do to try and get you to throw hands. It's like Tyron Woodley, if you remember, used to just be out there, Din Thomas every time, telling him, hey, man, I like what you're doing, but maybe in combination. And then he just wouldn't do it. So that for me feels like where we're at with Cody Brundage. After a 12-fight sample, I can't really expect him to have a better process this time out. But I do think he will be my pick, very reluctantly so. Next up, my man, we got Gabriella Fernandes taking on Julius Stoliarenko. And you were talking about, somebody that can only win in the first round. Stoliarenko, I think she has one win via split decision. And other than that, it's been first round arm bars for her. On the Fernandes side, couple tough outs early in her UFC career, but bounced back with 2 straight wins. She's now 500 in the promotion. How do you see this one going down, Andrew?
Yeah, a theme of this card, obviously a lot of big favorites, and Stoliarenko is such a limited fighter. Like, I get why the line is as wide as it is. There were some good matchups for her at points in her UFC career, but we've seen how it goes when she doesn't get the perfect style fight that she needs to win, and I don't really think this is that. Could she, get her takedown in the first 30 seconds, go to her armbar and win? Yeah. Does it happen more than a small percent of the time? Probably not. Fernandes is just a better fighter. She's a better striker, more physical. I think she has the tools to, keep this fight upright, obviously. And Stoliarenko ends up on her back so much, which is not a great, not something you want to do very often in MMA, but she just is very willing to put herself there, which makes it hard to win decisions in general. So it's tough to give her much, if any, decision equity. I think Fernandes probably finds a late finish here, and if not, probably wins a clear decision.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to note is on that last fight, the props kind of suck, right? And on this fight, I feel like the props kind of suck as well. I know that you look at money lines and totals a lot. I tend to look at the prop market as well as a point of exploit. And I'll be honest, man, like they've got the finish props a little bit low here as well. It's a juice fight for a women's to end inside the distance, which is always a little bit scary. But I think Stoliarenko's a bad gasser. She's one of the women that did struggle on the scales this morning, was able to make it on her second attempt. But we've seen in the past, she's fainted on the scales. She's had times in the past where she just is out there, looking like she's on life support in terms of the cardio. So none of that bodes well for her here. And the other thing I think that's really important is you mentioned, she's a girl that's pretty limited in how she wins the fight, goes out there, gets that armbar. Fernandes has never been finished. So is it to say that she can't get finished? I mean, it's possible, right? But I think of Bleda as a more dangerous fighter. I even think of Jazuda Vicious as a way more dangerous fighter. So to go out there, survive those 15-minute fights, even in some bad positions on bottom, I think that speaks to the fact that Fernandes has some, staying power in the bottom position. So maybe she ends up there in round 1 and there's a live entry or something available. But ultimately, I think that this fight is kind of priced appropriately. Stoliarenko, if you like that side, click on the sub. I've heard some takes on Stoliarenko decision, but to your point, when you put yourself in bottom position, you lose MMA fights. And I don't think Stoliarenko's great at ending up on top. And even when she gets there, she's willing to sell out that position for the armbar. So just negative EV strategy to try and win decisions in MMA.
Very.
Next up, my man, I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on this one, because when I look at this fight, this is a fight where I see Uros Medic as a dangerous, skilled striker. He's got power in his hands. I certainly respect the guy, his willingness to get back up off the canvas against Semmelsberger, find his third-round finish there. That was certainly admirable. So I think Medic has some of the right pieces, but this is a guy who's never seen the scorecards in an MMA fight, period. Like, the guy's been in insane, violent wars for the most part, and, he's been knocked down, he's been hurt, he's been finished on the feet. On the ground, I think he's a major liability. I bet Jalen Turner by submission. I bet Miktabek Orobai by submission. Both those guys cleaned him up. Both those guys are lightweights in the UFC. So I think that when you look at Gilbert Urbina, I don't know how to get a read on the guy, right? He's 29. He's dealt with injuries. He's not been very active since he got to the UFC. But on The Ultimate Fighter, he was a decent enough guy. Went out there and got multiple takedowns against Brian Battle at 185 pounds. And I think Brian Battle would pretty easily outgrapple Uros Medic, just to tell you the truth. So when I look at that, I say to myself, Urbina's got some equity here. If he comes out spamming takedowns, in my opinion, to just take this guy down, take his back, and finish him. So for me, like when you see a big underdog and there's that kind of dynamic, it's certainly going to pique my attention. But I think that if he doesn't get the takedowns going, or he can't land a big kick to the body or something meaningful, I don't like his striking process over time. And I think he's a little bit too loose on the feet. I don't think his defense is there. So Uros Medic is probably going to knock him out at some point if the fight gets extended. But I don't really trust Uros Medic at these kind of prices, just generally speaking. I think I even, had my doubts against Tim Means, and Tim Means is an older guy who was well past his sell-by date, right? But I just thought, what if this guy gets one takedown? He's got long arms, maybe he can make something happen. And Gilbert Urbina, he's 29 years of age, right? He's not an old man. He's not washed in that regard. So he comes off a knockout loss against Radke, a guy who's a proven grappler, much more proven than Uros Medic on the ground. And maybe he couldn't get that fight to the mat. I think in this fight, he would be foolish not to proactively wrestle and grapple Uros Medic. So, Andrew, how do you feel about this fight? Do you think I'm insane? Does Gilbert Urbina have any win equity here? I didn't play the line, but again, just from a theoretical standpoint, I think it's a dog or pass. And maybe like a Urbina by sub if you're looking to get cheeky. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I think you hit on all the main points here. Really, I went into tape wanting to like Urbina here. I've been very critical of Uros Medic since he got into the UFC. I've faded him. I've attempted to fade him. I've done it all. He's just not a guy that I think is high level. That being said, there are some things you have to respect about him. Obviously, he's a solid striker. He's very powerful. And I couldn't get over how hittable Urbina is. Like, even right in the beginning of fights, I feel like you're holding your breath if you're out there rooting for him. He doesn't have good defense. He's hittable. And, what's he been up to really? Like, I don't know what his career trajectory is from here. He hasn't fought much. Like, just looking at his UFC record, like he got here 4 years ago and he's only fought 3 times in the UFC. I mean, his one win is against Orion Kosei, who's no longer with the promotion. Gun to my head, I would take Urbina or pass, but luckily I don't have that gun to my head right now, so I'm gonna take a pass here.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for the value side, like there's one way to approach the fight, right? Like you're either taking Urbina or you're just passing on this fight. The other thing I wanted to note here, man, shout out to Nate in the chat, member for 5 months here, an absolute soldier, Nate, one of the OGs, one of the members of the chat who's been rocking with us for a long time. But on top of that, guys, the under is like minus 150 in this fight. And I feel like if you were looking to lay chalk, like if Uros Medic is going to look like a big favorite in this fight, he's probably just going to knock this guy's head off. And additionally, like I could see this fight being a scrambly, chaotic mess for the 7.5 minutes if it lasts that long. So for me, I feel like this is going to be an underpaced fight. And if I'm looking at minus 3xx on Medic or minus 150 to the under, I'd much rather have the under and give myself that equity for Urbina to come out here and just like barnstorm this guy in the grappling, which we've seen happen multiple times in the UFC against lightweights, right? Like you guys can watch back the Turner fight, and that's not like clean grappling that like got him to those positions. Like Medic made some mistakes, and he made some mistakes against Orobai as well. I know Orobai's a tank, but he's a 155-pound tank, and he's able to take this guy down on short notice and run him for his paper. I remember thinking like they're making Orobai minus 125. No fucking way, because I just think of them as like a different class of fighter. So for me, in this fight, this is like the same class of fighter, but Medic is a step above. So I think Medic should be like a minus 200 here, but I just think the price is a little bit out over its skis. All right, man. Next up, we got Joselyne Edwards taking on Priscila Cachoeira. Andrew, why don't you start us off with the ladies?
Yeah, it's very rare you see someone hang around in the UFC for a long time with such a hole in their game. And Cachoeira, obviously, the elephant in the room is her grappling defense is tragic. It really is a miracle that she's gotten this far in her career. And even against a fighter like Edwards, who's not known to be this great wrestler or this great jiu-jitsu player, like she's still competent enough to hit takedowns. And for me, that's that's probably enough here. You're not exactly going to need to be Jordan Burroughs to take down Cachoeira. So I think Edwards, really the only question you're asking yourself is when Edwards gets on top, is she going to stay in half guard? Is she going to look to find a finish? I couldn't get too good of a read on it. I tend to think she typically stays in half guard. Like she doesn't look to be too aggressive on top. But that being said, against someone like Cachoeira, who does have such a blatant deficiency on bottom, I'm curious if she does try to get a little bit more aggressive from top position here, because we've seen Cachoeira get dominated on the mat before. So I think this is a really good fight for Edwards. I agree with her being a big favorite.
Yeah, man, I'm going to make it 2 for 2. I actually picked Priscila Cachoeira in her last fight outright. Like, I just thought she was going to win the fight. I think Joselyne Nunes, with all due respect, I thought she was one of the worst jiu-jitsu players in the UFC. So I was like, that's the way you beat Priscila Cachoeira, is like having better jiu-jitsu, taking her to the ground. And, you know, on top of that, Nunes is tiny, right? So, like, I was like, yeah, maybe she could bonk her on the chin, but, like, that's about how I see her winning this fight. Otherwise, it's going to be close. And I did say, even in my article, Cachoeira by knockout. You know, she throws heavies, like she's willing to swing. And Nunes has been cracked before, right? She stands in the pocket. Joselyne Edwards is a little bit longer, right? Got that 5-inch reach advantage. I think that could pay dividends for her here. But then to your point, you know, if she does end up getting inside, you know, Cachoeira tries to get close, tries to start grabbing a hold of her for collar ties and things like that. She's not going to be swinging back like Joselyne Nunes. I think she will go for those takedowns, and she's been getting them. You know, the other thing is, I think early on in her UFC career, maybe the discipline wasn't there, you know, wasn't making weight consistently, was losing fights that were winnable for her. But aside from that Cornole fight, which, again, like on the night, I thought it was a robbery. It was a close enough fight, but like they definitely could have given her that fight. You know, they go back and forth between the damage and the control time, right? She had controlled her. She had done a lot of, you know, the meaningful minutes winning of that fight, but then she ended up losing on a couple big moments. Fair enough. But you look at this fight, you know, that's, I think, what it would take for Cachoeira is either a couple big moments where she steals close rounds or she knocks her out. Because otherwise, Cachoeira just doesn't have a great process for winning MMA fights. And, you know, the thing that's been a consistent theme for her is getting beaten down over the course of, you know, a 2 or 3 round beatdown, and then ending up, you know, capitulating, not from a lack of effort or a lack of willpower, just from getting beaten to a pulp and having nothing left to give. And at 36 years of age, you know, after a pretty brutal career in MMA, I don't like this fight for Priscila Cachoeira. I think she's going to be the smaller woman. I think she's going to feel the physicality, and I think she's probably going to give it up in 2 or 3, you know, after a pretty brutal fight. But if it goes the distance, I think that Edwards is going to get her hand raised anyway. Did you have something you wanted to add, Andrew?
No, I agree with that 100%. And almost, I forget what fight it was a couple fights ago. I was saying they had no decision equity. Like, how does Cachoeira win a decision here?
2 big like knockdowns at the end of a round type of thing. If you go back and look at her career, she has had some wild moments. Like I think she cut open Ji on Kim, maybe late in the fight with the elbow. So she's done some of those late fight heroics. But yeah, man, it would take a really special effort from Cachoeira, and I think right now her stock is like a little bit too high again. You know, because she got the big knockout, but her skills. It's like the weirdest resume, man, in UFC history, because she loses to all these girls who are like good. But then a lot of the wins that she has are like the lowest level wins that you could get in the UFC. So you got to, you know, go through with a fine tooth comb to find the reality of Priscila Cachoeira. It's somewhere in between, but I don't think it's good enough to beat Edwards.
Yep. Well said.
My man. Next up, we got Elijah Smith taking on Toshiomi Kazama. I was a guy that questioned Elijah Smith coming into the UFC. You know, I was thinking to myself, like, I saw him capitulate against Reyes Cortez. You know, maybe the guy just doesn't have it for 3 rounds, but Vince Morales went out there and pushed him, you know, gave him 3 rounds of hard effort, and he was able to go out there and win that fight. So for me, that did tell me something about him. You know, the kid's still 22. I always talk about, for me, I'm looking for guys on the right end of their physical development. You know, typically 25 and over is appreciated for me. It depends on the fighter and the athlete, of course. You know, and the matchup, right? Austin Bashi against C-Rod, I liked C-Rod. Austin Bashi in his most recent matchup, I liked Austin Bashi, right? So it does depend on that as well, but it's, you know, for me, certainly something I'm considering. 22 years of age, you know, is this guy too young? I don't think so. You know, I think physically he's there. I think athletically he's there. And just looking at his opponent, right? If they matchmake him accordingly, I think Elijah Smith is going to do fine in the UFC. And I think that Kazama is not as athletic as he is, right? I think Kazama is a guy that's got a very competent ground game. And that's about where I would stop the accolades on his side. I think he's a guy that's got very loosey-goosey striking. I think he's a huge liability at the UFC level. He's been knocked down at least once in each of his fights, knocked down twice by Rinya Nakamura, knocked out cold by Rinya Nakamura in that same fight. By the way, were you guys here last week when we said Rinya might knock him out by accident? He literally threw like 2 strikes. The second one put him down. So Rinya, that kind of athlete, right? You look at Elijah Smith against Vince Morales. Vince is like one of the toughest guys to finish. Tough guy to look good against. I think Kazama is the exact opposite. I think Elijah Smith's going to brutalize this guy and finish him in the first 2 rounds. What do you think, Andrew? Am I crazy? Does Kazama have another submission roll up his sleeve?
No, man. I mean, Kazama might have a chance really early here. And when I say really early, I mean 3 minutes probably. Outside of that, I don't know. He's so limited in skill set. Like, he's not a striker. When he faced adversity against Armfield, he really, just seemed to have nowhere to go. Smith's a much better athlete than him. I think he's really going to struggle here. I think Smith probably finds a finish.
Yeah, man. We see this one the same. I even gave Kazama a little bit of credit coming into the fight with Charlampos, just because I feel like Charlampos is a guy that I don't rate. But I think Elijah Smith would do bad things to Charlampos. So for that reason, I'm going Elijah Smith in this one. I think he gets it done inside the distance. All right, next up, man, we got Julius Walker taking on Rafael Cerqueira. And Andrew, I made the mistake of betting Rafael Cerqueira via submission early in his UFC career. I'm like, man, this guy's training at Galpa de Luta. He's doing all the right things in Brazil with my guy Jonathan Almeida. He's got the T-shirt. Mick and Sean, I'm ready for the UFC. He was not ready for the UFC. The narrator said above, and then he was not ready for the UFC. Cerqueira has just looked, abysmal in his first 2 fights. I think that's fair to say. Julius Walker, on the other hand, made his UFC debut, did not win it, but made a very solid account of himself against Alonzo Menefield. So certainly, earned a little bit more credit, but minus 700 credit. I do think the line, from a money line standpoint is, wild, right? But I also can understand why people need to see something from Cerqueira before they feel comfortable backing him. Just everything I know about MMA, I'm not comfortable laying minus 400 and above on guys that I don't know for sure have a grappling advantage, and this guy has less experience in Julius Walker. So for me, there's enough uncertainty to not like this minus 700 price tag, but I get why Walker's favored here. I think he's going to TKO this guy in the first round against the cage, because everything I've seen from Cerqueira up to this point in the UFC says that he's just going to stand there, cover up, and wait for the referee to intervene. Andrew, do you see it any differently? What do you think is going to happen in this fight?
I think you're right on the money, but that being said, out of all the big underdogs so far, I think this is, if you made me pick one, this would probably be the one, just because, he's been finished fast twice in the UFC. In his last fight, I thought it was going not terrible for him against Bukauskas before he got KO'd. Like, obviously, he still got KO'd really early, but Julius Walker isn't really proven much to me either so far. Like, and one thing I've found is typically when a guy performs well and loses, they get like a little bit of a bump in stock, a little bit more than they should have. It's almost the same thing as like when a guy loses a split decision, like that maybe people think he won, he almost gets a little bit of a stock bump from that in his next fight. So I do think there's probably a little value on the big underdog here. I'm not saying that it's a smash spot or anything, but there's only one way to bet this fight. It's the plus 500 on a guy who's pretty volatile, and like, he's obviously fundamentally flawed, not a guy I see having like some great UFC career, but he wasn't this big of a favorite, he wasn't this big of an underdog in his first couple fights. And to me, not much has changed. Like, my opinion of him hasn't really changed. Like, he still is what he is. He just, kind of happened to lose those fights, which I personally thought he was going to lose anyway. So yeah, I don't hate taking the big underdog here, even if it's a bet that could look pretty silly in hindsight.
I've said a million times on this show, you have to risk looking like a fool sometimes to cash on big underdogs. And I think that's exactly what Cerqueira is like. He's got double the professional experience. It's not like he's like 50, right? He's 35. At light heavyweight, that's not super uncommon. He's
Yep.
similar in height and reach. So it's not like there's one massive advantage for Walker, except that in his last fight, he attempted and threw strikes, and Rafael Cerqueira has landed like 10 in 2 UFC fights. So that's been the downside for the guy. And also, man, if you were to say, like, Liam, what's your frustration with the guy? Because I did bet on him by sub in his first fight. The guy hasn't attempted a takedown yet in the UFC, and he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's getting bombed on in his fight. So it's like, hey, man, next time you get punched in the face really hard, shoot a takedown. See what happens. Give yourself a chance. So for me, that's at least the upside again. And here's one thing I'll note, Andrew. When you talk about recency bias and these kind of things, when he came to the UFC, I believe I bet the sub plus 750, and I think it closed way lower. I think it closed at like plus 550. Dude, it's like 23-1 now. So it's like, how wrong were they the first time when he was fighting Ibo Aslan? I do think Walker, arguably could be a better jiu-jitsu player, but it's arguable. It's like, what the fuck do we really know? Physically, they're different kind of guys, right? Different builds. So I think that this is a high volatility fight, but ultimately I was in the DMs with my guy Julius Walker a while back, and I told him, like, hey man, you know that if you just come forward and throw punches really hard at this guy, like, he's probably going to cover up like along the cage. And he's like, I've watched his fights, I understand the assignment. Like, I think that the guy knows what he's dealing with Cerqueira. So it's going to be an IQ test in part, right? Let's see if this guy is who he thinks he is. And it's a big number to find out, though, right? For a guy who's 0-1 in the UFC in a volatile light heavyweight class, minus 700, you got to make sure you don't get caught speeding. Next up, my man, this is a fight that I've completely flipped in terms of my perception on over the course of the week. When I first heard it, I was like, man, Erik Anders, huge underdog price. Like, it's probably something I'm going to have to take a look at. And going back over the footage and also, hearing what Erik's saying about the fight, it's his retirement fight. He had basically done interviews back in July talking about, like, I'm looking forward to, closing out my UFC career and moving on with my life. And, he's been active in grappling and doing some other things. So I wish him nothing but the best, man. I love watching Erik Anders fight. He's a fun guy. But I think the reason that he's, like, comfortable retiring from MMA is that his chin is going, and when you've done football competitively for a long time and then you come over to MMA, my worry for football players is always that they're going to get knocked out. We've seen it a lot with these football players, man. The knockouts, like, sometimes it doesn't even look right? They get hit like one time on the side of the head and they start doing the stagger. It's like concussion issues are real. And in football, a lot of people accumulate them. So when you got a guy like Erik Anders, who's on his second career in combat, so to speak, right? Not, combat in terms of, kickboxing or going out there doing jiu-jitsu or wrestling, but hey, he's out there slamming into each other every 2 plays, right? That's not good for your brain. And then now he's getting dropped in every fight by guys that are kind of lower echelon middleweights. The UFC guys, they're not a very nice company, right? Like, they're not here to make friends with people and be like, hey, thanks for all the memories, right? More often than not, they set people up for failure on the way out because they're trying to build up the guy who's going to be here, right? And they're going to send somebody else home disappointed and say, thanks for all the memories. When you look at CLD, the guy finished 3 of his UFC opponents, didn't finish Pullaev, but Pullaev, kind of a long, awkward guy, a gangly striker, a guy, not that old either. So he went out there, did some damage to him, beat him up a little bit, maybe didn't put a stamp on it, didn't get that finishing mark. And you talked about, how the market perceives people after a certain kind of fight or a certain kind of outcome. He kind of had a letdown performance against Pullaev where people expected him to smash him to bits, and he beat him up and won a convincing fight, but maybe didn't go out there and put up a huge DFS score and didn't get the ITD prop for people. So they kind of just downgrade that performance. It's like the guy's 4-2 in the UFC. He lost to, a good striker in, what's his name? Petrosian, right? A guy who struggled in the grappling, but he's a good striker, fundamental guy, has a win over fucking RoboCop, for fuck's sake. So solid enough guy. And then you look at, he lost to RoboCop, right? Like, RoboCop went out there, took him down. If my memory serves, I believe it does, you had RoboCop in that fight. I believe I remember you clear as day making a pitch for RoboCop before that fight. And so maybe you'll have an Anders pitch for this one. But all of it's to say, I looked at the body of work and I'm like, CLD seems to me like a guy who's still learning, putting it all together on the job. Now he's had 6 fights in the UFC. He's 30 years of age. He's got a massive size advantage. And I'm like, this seems like a fight that he could win, a fight where he could hurt this guy, finish him. And for me, that is like a reason why I just didn't get the Anders. I was like, I don't love the idea of betting people in their retirement fight. And like, just looking at him getting dropped by Chris Weidman, looking at him getting dropped I think it was MAB, looking at him getting dropped by Jamie Pickett, which I thought he was going to dominate and embarrass Jamie Pickett. Bro, it's like a nip tuck fight. I was like, Anders is washed, right? So if Anders is a little bit washed and CLD is starting to get more comfortable inside the octagon, I think it could just be a timing issue where Anders, a guy historically very difficult to finish, just doesn't have it anymore. I don't think he's going to have the same will. I don't think he's going to have the same desire to dig deep. And if he ends up in a bad spot, I think he might just end up giving it up this time. So for those reasons, man, I think CLD gets it done. And I think he's going to be the third man to finish Anders. What do you think about this one, brother?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, again, super relevant. It's funny, you know, looking back on Anders' career, I feel like he was, I don't know how many people watching this were, you know, hardcore into the UFC back in like 2017, 2018. But I vividly remember when Anders got here, it was like, oh, you know, this big athletic football guy, you know, he comes over and he got a couple lollipop matchups in his first couple fights. And then I remember he headlined a card against Lyoto Machida.
I knew you were about to say that. Lyoto.
Yeah, in his third UFC fight, and he was a big favorite against Lyoto Machida. And, you know, he's had some up and down results throughout his career. Really solid guy. You know, I know him decently well by now. Really solid guy. Even lately, like, he's won 3 out of his last 4. Like, you could say what you want about the guy possibly not living up to his hype in the beginning of his career, but he's found a way to make it in this company for, you know, 8 years now, which is to me really impressive. I think probably one of the things the market gets wrong the most, just generally speaking, is how hard it is to be a 500 level UFC fighter for a long time. And so I give Anders a lot of respect for that. Obviously, you know, this is probably his most unforgiving matchup in a while. Like, the Weidman fight, you know, it was a war. He did what he had to do. He looked relatively good. But like you said, like the Pickett fight, you know, the Barrialt fight, even if you go back a little further, like the second Muniz got his back, it was bad news. The second, you know, the second some guys, like, I don't want to say make him work because he knows how to work, but the second some guys kind of throw him off of like that lowish tempo clinch game, like, you know, he struggles when you make him fight the right type of fight. And I think Duncan can do that. Again, though, like, we're talking about a minus 500 here. So it's like, if I'm handicapping someone minus 500, like, I think they have to flawlessly, you know, handle business in every aspect of the fight. And Anders, you know, he does find a way to make some of these fights close. Like, if just, you know, looking at his career, like a split decision with Park, you know, I talked about the Machida fight all the way back in the day, which was a split decision. And, you know,
I got lucky as fuck cashing Park in that fight, by the way. Erik Anders easily could have won that, and I laid some chalk. So got away with one there.
Yeah, you know, we've all been on both sides of that. And even like like if you know, rest in peace, Elias Theodorou, like fights like that where he just is able to hang in there, and all of a sudden it's like you could make a case for him in a fight. Even the Barrialt fight, you know, it wasn't a split decision, but it was a competitive fight, and I almost think in a way he could lull guys into, you know, I land a strike, you land a strike, and I push you up against the cage a little bit, and like you land a strike, but then I push you up against the cage again a little bit, and all of a sudden 15 minutes goes by, and it's like, oh, who are they going to give that to? So I do see a path for Anders here. You know, I'm not making a case to go out and smash it. There's obviously a ton of concerns. I do expect Duncan to win the fight, but we talk about all these big underdogs on the card. This is another one I'd consider. Like, him and Cerqueira are probably the two that, you know, if I'm gonna part ways with money on a big underdog that's, you know, mathematically considered a long shot, he'd be one of the ones I consider.
I think that makes sense, man. And even looking back, one thing I've been doing a lot more lately is just looking at people's DFS box scores as like an idea of whether or not they do shit in their fights, and like if they're out there like putting up substantial output. And Erik Anders has been a guy who's pretty consistently scored enough, especially in wins, to justify his price range this week. He's a big dog. And so that's also the kind of guy that if it goes to the scorecards, they're going to compete. They're going to give themselves an honest chance. He fills time. He goes out there, like you mentioned, he'll go for that football tackle. He'll press you into the fence. You take him down, he'll get back up, try and take you down. Just even up the score type of thing. So Anders is a gamer. I've always respected the shit out of the guy. Cash me the KO prop against Dawkins as well, who's back in the UFC. So shout out to Erik Anders there, KO plus 600 that night. But ultimately, man, I do just worry a little bit whenever I hear that retirement word, that if somebody gets hit, they get hurt, they have any reason to doubt, they're like, you know what? Let me just get out of here. And Dustin Poirier, bless his heart, man. He was ready to go home a couple of times and found his way back in. And that's a gangster play. But most guys, they can't find that second win in their last fight. So I think that if he takes a big knee to the body or something like that and he's gasping for air, I think he might just be like, thanks anyways, guys. I'll see you next time. And I would respect him. Anders is a killer, but every dog has their day. All right, next up.
If I can just add
please do.
Two more things real quick. One, you mentioned like if it does go to the cards, this fight's favored to go to the card. So I do think there's a case to be made that if Duncan does justify his price, that there probably is some value on the under 2.5. And just one more, like we talked about, you mentioned cashing a knockout prop on him. This is another one for some older school fans, but we talked about how hyped Erik Anders was. I remember it was summer of 2018. Anders was fighting Tim Williams, if anyone remembers that. Anders, again, this is when Anders was still like super hyped. He was just coming off of that split decision loss to Machida, and he was a minus 1,400 or whatever the hell it was against Tim Williams. And I remember like I even bet like his KO prop, like it was like minus money, like it seemed like as foregone of a conclusion as it could be. And the fight was close like the whole time, and with 20 seconds left in the fight, Anders, if I remember correctly, he Williams had his knee on the ground like in a illegal position. And Anders, like, if I'm remembering this right, he like soccer kicked him, but
you're dead right, 100%.
His hand like that much, and I thought, I was like, oh my god, he's gonna get DQ'd for that, and I looked closer, and his hand was up, and I was like, he just got so lucky because it was not intentional at all. Like he was fully going for an illegal shot and just got lucky. Like, and that was just a funny one. I wonder what happened to Tim Williams. I don't remember watching him fight after that. Yeah, that was his last time in the UFC. Makes sense.
Dude, that reminds me of Jeremy Stevens, Josh Emmett. If you remember this moment where Jeremy Stevens takes Josh Emmett, grabs him by the back of the head, and swings a knee that probably would have been a fatality, and then he missed by an inch. So then the fight continues and he finishes him. Dude, it literally would have been like the easiest DQ of all time. He would have just held him in for a freaking knee to face, and because Stevens missed, he got the knockout win. MMA is retarded. But I do love it anyway. And, man, when you look at this fight, it has a high propensity for volatility. Anders is a hitter. Even in that fight with Weidman, he gets dropped, gets back up, gets back on offense. I mentioned on Wager Wars this week, I was on my guy Cody's show. Shout out to Cody. Shout out to Wager Wars. The fight not to go the distance. Like you just mentioned, man, I was like at plus 130. I know that Anders has this reputation for being kind of that decisionator. He's got knockouts in the UFC. And Christian Leroy Duncan, last time he went to decision prior to that, he'd been putting up good DFS scores. He'd been putting guys away, even if it took him until round 2, that kind of thing. So I feel like in this fight, as he gets more comfortable, Duncan's going to get more aggressive. And I think on the other side, Erik Anders, if it's your last fight, maybe you just start throwing some kill shots. Maybe you give yourself something to play for. And the guy's got real power. So till the final bell, you mentioned it with the Tim Williams fight. Till the final bell, plus 130 on the fight not to go the distance with two big guys, 285-pound men who are going to be 200 on the night of, swinging at each other's head. I mean, I could see this fight ending inside the distance.
Yeah.
All right, man. Next up, I got something for this fight, man. And I think John Matsumoto is going to get another one. And I think it's that guillotine, man. I watched some tape on this fight, and I've really been impressed with Matsumoto's guillotine. I like to think of myself as a guillotine connoisseur. I'm a guy that really likes my guillotine chokes. And when you look at John Matsumoto, man, the way that he approaches it, he sees an opportunity. He seizes the opportunity, man. I've seen him jump on necks. I'm seeing one guy takes a bad shot. He'll catch you and fall back to it. And the thing that I don't like about guys who go MMA guillotines, right, is a Cody Brundage. He's out there, pulling guard with the guillotine. When that shit doesn't work, you end up flat on your back, right, with somebody on top of you. That's a bad spot in MMA. If you see Gene Matsumoto, the vast majority of the time, guys, he ends up on a hip. He ends up on the top position with the mount. The guy understands that the guillotine can be used to sweep, get on top, and that's what he does a lot of. So I really like Matsumoto's guillotine. I like his approach, and I think that he's a guy that is solid in round 2 and 3, right? And when you look at Miles Johns, if I had to make a criticism, I think sometimes, his big swinging style, his commitment to wrestling with power and with a lot of muscle and physicality, that kind of thing, makes you tired. So I think he can normally do that for about 7.5 minutes when he's on the right drugs, maybe 12.5, but I don't think he's on the drugs. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the guy's certainly been on and off in the UFC. And I think we've seen different standards of performance as a result. But frankly, I just think there's very small margin for error against a guy like Matsumoto if you start to get hurt and if you start putting your head in the hole and making mistakes. And Matsumoto showed against Rob Font, he can get multiple takedowns. He can get offensive wrestling and grappling going. But Font is a savvy veteran. Font's a guy. You were talking about the value of sticking around the UFC. I mean, the guy's been a top 15 bantamweight now for how long? And he's gone out there and outlanded countless good fighters and then just got dropped and cost himself rounds in fights like that. But Rob Font is a serious fighter. And I bet him to win that fight. Man, it was a sweat. Man, it was a close one, right? Matsumoto made him earn every bit of that. So for me, Matsumoto at 25, man, he's the exact kind of guy you don't want to sign to fight. He's pissed off. He just lost that undefeated record. And now Miles Johns, poor guy, has got to go out there and deal with that. So I think in rounds 2 and 3, John Matsumoto is going to be on his ass. He said in the interviews, I know that I'm going to hit Miles and he's going to start turning back into a wrestler. And that's how I feel too. So I think he's going to get on some shots from too far away. I think he's going to get caught in that guillotine choke and it'll be over. So for me, Matsumoto by sub, that's the pick for me, man. And I think if it goes to the cards, I think he'll get the job done there too. Maybe a 29-28. Miles does tend to start off pretty good in his fights, but ultimately, I just don't think the volume's there. You look at this guy's body of work, the most shots he ever landed in the UFC was 80. And it was against Anderson Dos Santos. The guy doesn't move his head, feet, nothing. Guy just stands there waiting to be hit. So I think John Matsumoto is a much different challenge. Andrew, how do you feel about this matchup? Obviously, a big favorite price tag here with Matsumoto. I'm not really interested in laying that, but I do think that he's going to get the job done and probably do it in the late portions of this fight.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've kind of made a case both ways in my head. If you take a look at Miles Johns, like we just talked about the fighter who hangs around for a long time. And it's not even like Miles Johns hung around the UFC for 6 or 7, whatever it's been now, and been a 500 level fighter. Like if you look at his UFC, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's 7-3 in 10 UFC fights, which is really solid. And so I can definitely make a case for him here. I do have some concerns, obviously. A lot of this fight comes down to Matsumoto's approach. If he gives Miles Johns the fight Miles Johns thrives in, like the way Douglas Silva de Andrade did, I think this line's off. But Matsumoto is so physical, and I think if he approaches this fight the right way, he probably will cover his price tag. Like if he gets right in Miles Johns' face from the opening bell, gets right after him, I think he probably does cover. But if he doesn't, and if he decides to kind of stay at range with Miles Johns, I think the line will look wrong. So it's a tricky one for me. I do feel like there's iterations of the fight where Johns does look like big value. It hasn't been very often in Miles Johns' career where he's looked like a plus 250 or plus 225, plus 250 underdog. It just hasn't happened very often. And if you look at who he's lost to, Felipe Lima, very solid fighter. Mario Batista, solid fighter. John Castaneda, like that's probably he's a decent fighter. He's probably the worst one of the bunch. I guess where do you put Matsumoto among probably somewhere in the middle? Like Matsumoto's obviously not like a Kevin Natividad, for example, but I don't think he's a Mario Batista either. So I'm pretty torn on this one. I think, just for parity's sake, I'll pick Johns here because I feel like I've been, just picking every favorite after every favorite on this card because it probably is how it's going to go. But from a side perspective, I do have some mild interest in Johns. If Matsumoto doesn't approach this fight the right way, I think that the line will look off.
Yeah, man, I respect that take for sure. Johns is a solid fighter. He's a guy that I've not always even given enough credit to in the past. I think before the Argueta fight, I wasn't really expecting too much of him, and I think that's the fight he actually popped for. But he went out there and like wrestled with Dan, did what he needed to do, kind of out hustled him in some positions. I was impressed by that. And when you look at Miles, I agree with you. Like normally guys do not look like a huge favorite against him, right? Normally they need to get him tired first. They need to get him uncomfortable before they can get him off of his game plan. Also, I think he's one of these Trey Ogden guys. I've noted before, they tend to show up with good game plans, knowing what they're supposed to do, in good shape, those kind of things. So, also I think that Trey Ogden, probably knows where to get the supply. Y'all do your own research, but you just look at those factors, like definitely pluses for the John side. But the one thing I will note is, you mentioned it, John Castaneda. That's like kind of the standout loss for Miles Johns, like in his UFC run, especially. I think Castaneda's 4-3 in the UFC, so he's not like a bad fighter, right? But kind of a middling guy. And I do think I rate Matsumoto a little bit higher than I would rate somebody like Castaneda. So for that reason, I think he can replicate the result, get that third round finish. But if it's 1-1 going into the third, I'm not going to be altogether stunned, because I agree with you. Miles Johns can compete on minutes here for sure. All right, man. Next up, this is a fight that fucking perplexes me. I'll just be honest, because I have gotten a lot of C-Rod fights wrong. Thankfully, I've been starting to get him right lately, right? I was not a C-Rod respecter. I was like, this guy misses weight. He doesn't show up like a professional. And then he moved up to 45. So with the move up to 45, I've been giving him a lot more respect, because I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, people want him at 35. He's not making the weight at 35. So, is he just not going to fight? He's got to fight. So he's fighting at 45. And he's a little bit undersized. So you know that going in. Then you say to yourself, all right, how's he going to do? In his last fight against Mel Costa, he made a fine account of himself, right? Didn't get the win, but that's a guy who's big, long, awkward for 145. He was able to do okay there, But you look at what has caused him consistent problems in his career. Bigger, longer guys at 145 pounds. That's been the problem, right? UFC veterans as well. That's been a problem. So Fili checks the boxes on all those regards. But then on the other side, you look at Andre Fili, and he's a guy that's had a very inconsistent UFC career at the best of times. He's been here forever, guys. When you talk about, 2017, have you been a fan since that long? Have y'all been a fan since 2013? Do y'all remember the Gato Frede Pepe days? It's like, this guy, Andre Fili's been here forever. And that's why, he's got a lot of respect. He deserves a lot of respect. Got to silence the phone because I'm hearing freaking vibrations in the background. But when you look at a guy like Fili, he fought Mel Costa, similar opponent, right? He gets the takedown, then he ends up sticking his head in the hole in the ground. That's kind of the story of Fili's career, making bad decisions, right? Ending up in places he shouldn't be, getting finished in the first and second round. Max Holloway, I think, finished him back in the third round. Other than that, it's all in round 1 and 2. The guy just goes out there, gets into these kind of frenetic fights. He's finished a couple guys early as well. I don't think he's ever finished a guy since 2013 outside of the first round in the UFC. But then he fights to competitive decisions. He's not easy to take down. That's kind of been his calling card. But you look at C-Rod, for me, he rates out as a good fighter. Eye test, the guy's got striking. I can see it. The guy's got grappling. I can see it. The guy can wrestle. He's getting better. But he's also undersized for the weight. So, I feel like C-Rod should be a deserved favorite here, but I don't feel like I have the comfort to say he should be 70% against a guy who's a favorite, against a guy who's a big guy, who's a UFC veteran with a lot of experience. There's a lot that pushes me against it. But I do think C-Rod wins the fight. At the end of the day, got to pick who I think wins the fight for the nature of this show. I think C-Rod wins it. I think Fili has been a mark to the submission throughout his career. That last time out against Mel Costa was not a great reflection of his grappling skills. So the guy's got pretty good wrestling, but in extended grappling exchanges, he can be found out in some of those. And I think we saw that against Bryce Mitchell. He got taken down 7 times. He got held down for large portions of that fight as well. Weird decision because he did land on the feet when he had moments. But ultimately, I think that Fili is a guy that I can't really trust where he's at. So it's a dog or pass situation, but I think C-Rod's probably going to catch his neck. I think he's improving over time, and I think Fili is probably going to be regressing fight over fight at 35 years of age. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, this is a weird one because typically, I try to make a case for each fighter, and this fight, I just keep finding myself making cases against both fighters. On the Fili side, it's okay, his last five, let's call it his last five fights, have just been super weird. Like a lot of quick KOs on both sides. Like he finished, Lucas Almeida in the first round. He got finished by Dan Ige in the first round. He got finished by Costa in the first round. He had the what was it? The Pineda fight was like a no contest.
Yeah, that was the best performance of his life, and he got no credit for it. That sucked.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, there have been like split decisions, quick finishes. I just feel like at this point in his career, like, he's been around a super long time, and like I keep saying, like 500 in the UFC, but at this point, his 500 isn't equal to his 500 5 years ago, if that makes sense. Like what I mean by that is, finished by Costa in the first round. His win against Cub Swanson, who's in his 40s, was like a split decision that easily could have gone against him. Ige knocked him out in the first round. Then on the Rodriguez side, it's like, okay, where does C-Rod thrive? He thrives in fights where people are trying to grapple him. He's a good scrambler. That's his MO. If you said what's C-Rod's best attribute, he's a good scrambler. He's hard to control. Feely's not going to do that. Feely probably is a better boxer than C-Rod. Feely's big, which, again, that's been, C-Rod's issue. Like, even a guy in Julian Erosa, who's a solid fighter, relatively well-rounded, has his flaws, but Julian Erosa survived like 2 minutes and then kind of made the rest of that round look easy. And it seemed to me, at least, that Rosa's size was really bothering Rodriguez. Like Rodriguez really couldn't do much to deter Rosa. Even Costa, like same thing. So it's a tricky one. Like trajectory wise, like Rodriguez. If I think Rodriguez has more finishing upside. Rodriguez is very tenacious, which is another good attribute of his. Like he's gonna keep getting after it. He's gonna stay in your face. He's not gonna get discouraged. And I do feel like Feely, I don't know if get discouraged is the right terminology here, but I think you said he finds a way to lose in some of these spots. Like he finds a way to get caught. So again, this is a really weird one. Like from a money line perspective, I would only bet Feely or I would pass. But I do think I do think C-Rod will get the job done. And I do think it is definitely viable for him to find a choke or something of that sort because, again, Feely just finds his way into precarious positions at times. C-Rod's good at capitalizing, so I will predict him to get it done, but it's a fight I can see playing out a lot of different ways.
Yeah, man, I agree. And one thing I just wanted to note is like it's such a mind fuck because C-Rod struggled with these long, tall guys, but on the other side, bro, Andre Feely has lost to a bunch of guys who are built just like C-Rod, like Dan Ige, like a shorter, stocker featherweight, knocks him the hell out. Joe Anderson Brito has a little bit of a reach to him, but he's like another short guy, knocks him out and does it quickly. Like you can get to Andre's chin even if you're the smaller guy. I think Lucas Almeida is like the same size as Feely. He got instantly killed. Like Feely's just one of these guys that can kind of go 50-50 with a lot of guys, but also, at 35, I just don't know what we're getting from him these days. And that last fight, one thing I like to do is if you have a chance, compare common opponents, how they both did against him, right? C-Rod made it an honest fight with Mel Costa, just came up short. Feely, blew a fight where it looked like he could have had a chance against Mel Costa. And it's like, that's the stage of the career where we're at with Feely. It's like at 35 with all this experience, I'm making the same mistakes I was making very early in my UFC career. So for me, that's just not a super bullish signal. And on the other side, Christian Rodriguez has been touted by Anthony Pettis as like the future of Roufusport since he was like 17 years old. So, at this point, 27, maybe he starts to find that groove a little bit in the UFC. If there was a time to start breaking out with those finishes, I think this is another opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
All right, next up, my man. I finally got a take. For some of these fights, I'm a little wishy-washy, bro. I think Angela Hill is the take in this fight for me in terms of the side. So I'm going to kick it to you. It seems like you've got something to say here too, my brother. What do you think about this matchup? 40 years of age, and I don't think she's ever been better. So for me, Angela Hill's the pick to click. What do you think?
Dude, that was crazy. I was going to say that exact same line. I was going to say, I haven't had a strong take yet, and I'm finally going to have one here. I think Angela Hill is a must bet at this price. I don't see Lucindo going out there and covering a 2-to-1 price tag. I just don't. Like, if you look at Lucindo's career so far, like, not a lot of difficult matchups on paper. You look like when she finally took a step up in competition, she had a close fight with Marina Rodriguez. It could have went either way. She definitely didn't cover 2-to-1. And then she kind of got dominated by Lemos. She didn't cover 2-to-1. And then it's like, okay, you know, she beat Poliana Viana. She beat Brogan Walker. Outside of that, it's like, I don't know, man. Even Hill, like you said, at this point in her career, like getting a win over Ketlin Souza, I thought she looked good in that fight. I thought, I just think we get into these spots where it's like, okay, the new kid on the block is here versus Angela Hill, who's a 500 level UFC fighter. And then the Denise Gomes fight happens. The Emily Ducote fight happens. Like even Lupi Godinez, like that's a solid win. And it wasn't super long ago. I don't think Lucindo has the style to cover 2-to-1 here. It's probably a hot take because I don't see a lot of people like predicting this, and I also looking at the props, like the takedown props and stuff for this fight, like people aren't giving Angela Hill any potential grappling success here. I wouldn't be surprised if Hill goes out there and top times her. I thought Lucindo looked tragically bad on her back in her last fight against Lemos, who isn't known to be a particularly good wrestler. And Angela Hill, we've seen her mix it up later in her career. Like she took Denise Gomes down 5 times. She took Luana Pinheiro down twice. She took Ketlin Souza down twice. If she goes out there and decides like I want to try to top time Lucindo here, I think she could do it. Like Lucindo didn't show me anything against Lemos that even struck me as I want to get up. It was like, okay, I'm mostly waiting for the round to end or hoping something just magically happens here. And yeah, I think it's a close fight more often than not. I'm not saying that this is like the perfect spot on Hill or anything. I'm not saying she should be minus 200 here. I just don't think she should be 40% or more implied. Like I think it's if you were asking me to handicap this fight, I think I would have it close to a pick 'em. I think I'd even side with Hill though in that spot. So I think there's a lot of value here, and I don't think Hill will look like a big size underdog. I'd be surprised if Lucindo goes out there and dominates.
I completely agree, my man. I'm so glad we see it the same way because last week I had one fight where I basically felt similar, right? And some weeks, as you know, you look at the board and you go like, I love everything, right? Every fight stands up. But most of the time it's like, this fight is like jumping off at me, right? And some others maybe don't, right? So you don't want to force action just for the sake of it. And last week, I didn't end up getting to anything, but I was like, if there's one bet I had to just like stake on the whole night, it would be Neil Magny. And it was just because like looking at the matchup, I was like, I love everything about this for Neil. Like at the price, like it just seems like there's no scenario where he should be less than a minus 110. And in this fight, it's like, I look at Yasmin Lucindo, and first of all, I mentioned before, guys, the DFS scores. Is she blowing up the DFS scores? No. Like, she's been a really, like, a non-entity, let's call it, on DFS. Why? She's not doing anything, right? In her last fight, she landed 4 significant strikes, guys. It went the distance. It was a 15-minute fight. She landed 4 significant strikes. Not going to get the job done, right? Against anybody. Then you see she goes out there the fight before that, and you mentioned it. Did she cover 2-to-1 against Marina Rodriguez? By the way, let's be fair, Andrew. The ghost of Marina Rodriguez, who had lost 5 of her last 6 fights on the way out the door, she retired. Thanks anyways. Thanks for the memories, Marina Rodriguez. That girl, yes, the girl who's been dominated on the ground to the tune of 10-8 multiple times in the UFC. Lucindo's having a very difficult time dominating her on the ground. Getting her face busted up when she's in short periods on the clinch, on the feet with her. So for me, like, the way that Lucindo wins this fight and covers her price is Angela Hill is 40 and like everything falls apart. And that is a downside risk with Angela Hill. But aside from that, what is the evidence that we have from Angela Hill? It's like she's fought younger women, right? Like girls that are young. In her recent fights, Denise Gomes. This isn't ancient history. Denise Gomes is a similar archetype to Lucindo. Similar amount of wins from Brazil. Also willing to mix it up, take it to the ground. I would argue she's more physical than Lucindo. I would argue she's a heavier power puncher than Lucindo. Angela Hill goes to Brazil and beats her. It's like, wait, if she can do that, she can't win this fight? It doesn't make sense to me, man. And for Ketlin Souza, she's a girl that's gotten better over the course of her UFC career. Is she a world beater? No. Can she be taken down? Sure. But you look and she's got a half-decent ground game. She's got some pop on the feet. There's some elements to her game that are okay. And Hill goes out there again and gets the win. And it's another girl who's 29, right? And you look at these girls, they're 29, they're 30, they're 25. It's like Hill's competing with the younger girls. She's doing fine. Who's she losing to, by the way? Baby Shark, 7-3 in the UFC. Mackenzie Dern, quality UFC contender. It's like, those are good girls. And Lucindo's not there. She lost to fucking Yasmin Waregi, by the way. Yasmin Waregi's hardly bought a win in the UFC since, right? It's like, I think that Lucindo, 5 years from now, good UFC fighter. I'm sure of it, right? She's got a lot of experience now. She's accruing all that in front of our eyes. But I just can't trust you at minus 200 when you do nothing. You're not better than Angela Hill, in my opinion, like clearly anywhere. Like if she's better, it's going to be on the ground, I think. And that I'm not sure of. Like to your point, who ends up on top here, for me, decides who wins the fight. And if it's Angela Hill in round 1, that's a disaster for Lucindo. But on top of that, it's like, let's say this fight plays out on the feet. I would favor Angela Hill straight up in a fight that just plays out on the feet. So for all those reasons, man, we love it. Angela Hill as the consensus dog for us. Next up, man, it's Steve Erceg. Whew, 3 hot off the prowl for our guy, Steve Erceg. He's still a minus 600 favorite in this one, despite 3 losses in a row. But we all know championship pedigree losses, right? He lost to Pantoja. It was a split decision, nip-tuck fight. Or actually, I believe it was unanimous, but it was like 3 rounds to 2 and basically on everybody's judges' scorecard. So close fight, right? Maybe a 4-1 Pantoja if you want to be aggressive, but Erceg made a very solid account of himself. Then gets cold cock knocked out by Guy France, dropped twice in the first round, comes back against Moreno. Kind of a lackluster decision loss there. Didn't make a horrible account of himself, but really didn't blow your hair back either. So now he's a 500 UFC fighter after starting off 3-0, after being 1 bad decision away from a UFC championship. What an unforgiving sport it can be, Andrew. And on the other side, Ode Osborne, he's trying to crawl his way back to 500, man. He was down bad, and now he's trying to crawl his way back up. He's 5-6 in the UFC, just knocked out Luis Garule. I'll be honest, man. I had some hopes for Luis Garule coming off Contender Series. Beat Nick Pitch. I know that you'll know as a New Yorker, as a wrestling guy, Nick Pitch was a big deal in the New York scene. Pinned Spencer Lee, very good wrestler. And to go get the win there for Garule and kind of out-wrestle him at points and did what he needed to do, I was impressed by that. Ode Osborne shut down that hype train real quick, right? Welcome to the UFC, buddy. Hold this. So shout out to Ode, right? Got back on track. But 5-6 in the UFC, I do think for a reason, man. His ground game has been a huge liability. I think Erceg's going to try and push it there. I think the price tag's kind of insane, just given the knowns about this fight and the unknowns of 135 short notice. But if you just said to me, Liam, who's the more skilled fighter? It's Steve Erceg as far as I see it, just not to this degree. So for me, Steve Erceg's the guy who I think is going to get his hand raised and get the win, but Ode's live to knock him out in the early going. He's a powerful hitter, and Erceg's there to be hit early. So should be a fun scrap, but ultimately give me Erceg because I think the ground game is going to be the difference maker. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, Ode Osborne's a funny one for me because I feel like I've had so many bets on his fights over the years, and like I've done pretty well. Like I had him against Charles Johnson. I had Feelho against him. I had him against Garul. But the one that really still keeps me up at night to this day was the Ronaldo Rodriguez fight. Like I really liked Ode as an underdog there. He goes out there right off the bat, pretty much knocks him out, and like tries to jump on a triangle, and he doesn't end up finishing. He drops the second round. The third round, he's winning in the third round, and like. There might have been a minute left, and he just has like a brain fart and like ends up on bottom and like drops it still could have gotten the round and it just didn't work out. I'm like, man, if this guy, like if I was holding a video game controller fighting the fight for him, I feel like he's minus 250 there. But he just, oh man, that one still keeps me up to this day. And it, not even from like a biased perspective, but I do take that stuff into consideration when I'm handicapping a fight. I'm like, okay, is this guy gonna fight smart? Does this guy have good fight IQ? And normally, that would deter me from betting them again in the future. But when someone's plus 400, you don't really need them to go out there and have high fight IQ. Erceg, 100% the better fighter. That being said, I feel like Ode gives himself a decent floor against anyone because of how athletic and explosive he is. Like he's liable to get finished himself. Like we've seen it happen to guys that aren't even particularly like top 10 or top 15 fighters, like Tyson Nam knocked him
Brian
out.
Boom.
Yeah.
Another pride of New York.
Yeah. And even like Brian Kelleher finished him. So I do think Usyk wins this at a high clip, but I also don't think you can be very wrong if you take Ode Osborne against anyone at this price. Like, we saw Usyk get knocked out by Cachoeira France, who I had Cachoeira France. I definitely wasn't like expecting him to like have a heavy-handed knockout per se. Just the fact that we saw that happen, like, could Ode knock him out? Yeah, probably. Like, he's an opportunistic finisher. He's outgunned here skill wise, so I think he might go like just kind of go balls to the wall for it, especially early. We've seen him do it. We saw him almost kill Ronaldo Rodriguez right off the bat. And just in general, he creates volatility in his fights. Someone who doesn't have the best defense, but who's also super athletic and a big hitter in his own right, just creates volatility. So if I was betting this fight, it would be Ode or pass, but I do expect Usyk to get it done.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to note here, my man, is I think that the under could have value in this fight, especially relative to Usyk's money line, right? When you look at Ode, you talked about it, front-loaded guy, right? Comes out aggressive, comes out explosive. I think all of his finishes career for and against. I was doing some research before we got on the air, so if I'm slightly off with these numbers, guys, don't crucify me, but I'm pretty sure like 13 of his fights that have ended inside the distance, like, they were in the first or second round for Ode. Like, he gets about that business. You know what I'm saying? And then when it does get to that third round, most of the time it's like going to make it to a gross split decision because he's tired and his opponent's tired. They fight at a pretty high pace. So that's something to note, right? And then on the Usyk side, I believe he has one third-round finish in his career. Otherwise, his finishes are in the first two rounds as well. He gets after it. I think he was kind of boxing up Schnell a little bit at the end of the first round, then put him away in the second in his only UFC finish. So I do think that, in principle, I like the unders here. Also, you've got a guy stepping up in competition against a guy stepping down in competition. For Usyk, be important for him career-wise, go out there, make a statement, kind of put this guy away. But for Ode Osborne, biggest opportunity is to come out here and spark this guy, catch him early, catch him when he's dry. I think a lot of that makes sense. So for me, that's the way I'm kind of looking at this. And if you're looking for round props or something on either guy, I would look early in this fight. Most of the time with Usyk, I think 2 and 3 will be the ticket. I think Osborne's the kind of guy forces the action early. So for that reason, I kind of like the unders in the early props. All right, man. That brings us to the main event. And I believe, again, Andrew, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've made plenty of coins backing Anthony Fluffy Hernandez on this rise up through the division. He's been a middleweight force, a pace monster. That's how I've been describing him this week. I think that in terms of people weaponizing pace in the UFC, there's a reason he draws comparison to Merab Dvalishvili. It's not because, Merab is the best takedown artist or Anthony Fluffy Hernandez the best takedown artist per se. It's that they're willing to shoot a million of them and they're willing to get tired, making you tired. And a lot of guys don't want to be in that fight, right? Even guys that are tough, that are badasses, that'll swing in the pocket and trade, you go, I go, mano y mano. If it's about who's going to get more tired, man, you find out a lot of people are cowards, man. Nobody wants to be tired, right? And Anthony Hernandez is a truth teller in that regard, right? He goes out there and makes people tired. But on the other side, man, you got a guy in Roman Dolidze who I've always felt was underrated in the UFC. Like, if you just look at the lines that he's had against the opponents he's had, from the time he was early on in his UFC career, I thought this guy was way underrated. I was betting him at chalk. And me, I'm a guy who's very hesitant to bet chalk. But I'm like, you're going to give me like minus 170 against Staropoli? Like, yeah, we're going to find out. Like, just like those kind of numbers, like, I was like, this guy's a better athlete. He's better at everything. Like, yeah, sure, give me that. And I think he's evolved into a better fighter even than I expected, in terms of his striking, in terms of his ability to fight for 5 rounds. I didn't necessarily expect those things from Dolidze. And then he's kind of evolved his game over time, Do I think he has the same cardio as Fluffy? No, that would be ridiculous, right? But can he go out there and fight hard for 5? He just did that against Marvin Vettori. So I think that was at least a feather in his cap. Like, hey, this guy's making some improvements over time. Against Nasruddin Imavov, he was essentially knocked out, woke back up, and started fighting again, and he found a wind, later on in that fight. So I think Dolidze is one of these guys that insanely hard to kill, hard work ethic, right? Willing to go out there and fight in every position. So for all those reasons, like, he's not the kind of guy I'm looking to lay big chalk against in principle. And on the other side, Fluffy is a guy that I think has now earned his respect. And it's like now the time to bet Fluffy has kind of passed unless he gets to a harder matchup, unless he gets to this kind of position. Because for me, man, it's like it's hard for me to lay this kind of price tag with a guy when I'm like, I've seen him get knocked out in the first round. I've seen him get rolled up in the second round. I've seen him have bad, dangerous moments against guys that I think of as lesser than Dolidze, right? Think back to the Josh Fremd fight. I bet Josh Fremd, by the way. To give some perspective, right? Josh Fremd, I believe, was plus 170. You can make an argument Fluffy won at 30-27 because Fremd's an idiot and kind of threw away the second round that he completely dominated with like 10 seconds left. He just gets ninja choked and punched a bunch of times. Really annoying. But basically, Josh Fremd dominated him in the second round, took him down, lifted him up, slammed him to the ground, took dominant positions. Like, you look at Fluffy, I've never seen a guy as high level as him pull bottom mount as many times I've seen Fluffy do it in high-level professional MMA fights, pulling somebody on top of him into the bottom mount position and then trying to recover from there. And it's like, you get away with that at a certain level. You get away with that a certain number of times, but it's like, you do that to the wrong guy at the wrong time, and the fight could be over shortly thereafter. And I kind of think of Dolidze as that kind of guy, where I think that his leg locks are serious. I think that his grappling overall is very good. Like, when he came to the UFC, that was like his calling card. Grappling, wrestling and grappling. And he got many, many takedowns. He got a lot of control time. And then the matchmakers basically told him, bro, you're boring. Nobody wants to watch you fight. They think you fucking suck. You need to go out there and start knocking people out or throwing hands or doing something interesting or we're going to cut you. And he's like, fair enough. Goes back out there and starts killing dudes, right? Like, starts knocking people out, starts breaking people's faces. He literally broke Kyle Dawkins' face, guys. Threw a knee, broke Kyle Dawkins' face, shattered it. He had to leave the UFC and go earn his way back on the regionals, right? So Ramon Dolidze, as far as I'm concerned, ended Phil Hawes' career. You know, everything else was a mere formality. Ripped the guy's knee into shreds, which was devastating. And then Big Dan's like standing there like I didn't see it, like waiting until the guy gets viciously knocked out after unbelievable non-stoppage. But this guy has no finishes via sub on his resume in the UFC. But then you watch him grapple and you're like, holy fuck, this guy's incredible. You know, like the Jack Hermanson fight, that grappling sequence is sensational. You know, so I just look at this fight as more competitive on paper than the line entails. I had said this week, I thought anything over plus 250 on Ramon Dolidze would be the side for me. And, you know, I'm kind of waiting to see where this line ends up. It's had a little bit of a tug of war. I've seen as high as plus 275s. I've seen as low as plus 240s at points during the week. So I really don't know where this is going to end up. I know that the Dolidze ITD at one point this week on Bet Online was like plus 230. And then the money line was like plus 250. I was like, so something can't be right about that. But just looking at the matchup overall, like, I think that Hernandez takes over if this fight sees rounds 4 and 5, but like, I don't know that it sees round 4 and 5. Like, I think it's going to be very volatile in the early going. And I just feel like Ramon Dolidze, you know, against a lot of guys has proven he can do real damage. Like, broke Kevin Holland's rib, broke Dawkins' face, ripped Phil Hawes' leg into pieces. Like, at a certain point, like, I feel like I need to respect this guy's ability to do damage. And on the other side, Fluffy is not above getting hurt. He's not above getting hit. He's not above getting into contentious fights. And so for all those reasons, man, in this kind of weight class, I feel like Dolidze being a little bit undersold by the price. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts, my man, because I know Fluffy is a guy that's earned our respect. And if we're looking for an American champion, Fluffy might be the one that fits the bill. So how do you see this one going down, man? Main event of the evening, and it should be a good one.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, a lot of this Hernandez magic, so to speak, happens in fights that were competitively lined, right? Like, if you look at the Kopylov fight, the Pereira fight, like, those were wildly off lines, right? Like, by any measurable statistic in retrospect, way off. You know, even Shabazian, he got more respect at the window, and it was still not enough. But then you get 3 wins in a row, 4 wins in a row, 5 wins in a row, 6 wins in a row. And it's like, okay, what was he, minus 400 against Brendan Allen? It's like, okay, there's no meat on the bone. And actually, there's probably value on the Allen side, even though Fluffy won that fight. And now it's like, okay, I think things kind of settled in a little bit. Like, this is about where I have it money line wise. I do think, like, even though Dolidze has shown the ability to go 5 rounds, like, it wasn't a fight like this where Fluffy's gonna, like, antagonize you for 5 rounds. You know, he's not gonna cardio kickbox with you. Like, he's gonna dive headfirst in and try to make you tired. Like that's what he does. He tries to make people tired. So I do think Hernandez does have a very big cardio advantage here. That being said, and I think you actually mentioned it earlier, like Fluffy at times gets a little sloppy. He's willing to get a little sloppy and put himself in the bad position to make his opponent work. So he puts himself in precarious positions sometimes. And against a guy like Roman Kopylov, like it's never gonna matter if you put yourself in a bad position. Like he could fight 100 rounds with Roman Kopylov, and he could start on bottom and get like it doesn't really matter. But
he could pull bottom mount in that fight, and we'd be fine.
Yes, but exactly. But Brendan Allen, like not as much. You can't pull bottom mount on Brendan Allen, and we saw him Fluffy run into some issues in that fight. And I think it's the same with Dolidze. Hernandez, even in fights on paper, are very, very, very favorable matchups for him. Like to me, him being competitively lined with Michel Pereira, and I'm not just saying this because it looked like it in retrospect. At the time, I was like, Fluffy's going to literally, wipe the octagon with Pereira. It's his easiest stylistic matchup on the roster. Like you can't do much better than that. Even in that first round, like again, it was just 1 round out of 5, but Hernandez wasn't getting easy takedowns in round 1 there. And it's like, okay, he's probably not going to get easy takedowns in round 1 against Dolidze. He might not even get easy takedowns in round 2 against Dolidze. And if he does, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But there's times where he'll even like kind of turn his back in a grappling situation to an opponent. And I just think if he gets sloppy against Dolidze early, there's a chance Dolidze makes him pay. So I'll throw a couple of fun ones out here. I think Dolidze round 1 submission plus 4,300 and round 2 submission plus 5,000 are both worth a look. I really do. Like it sounds crazy because they're such high numbers, but if he wins this fight, like I do think it's early more often than not. And just given the fact that Hernandez is going to sell out the grapple, the fact that he's going to sell out to push a pace, the fact that he's, literally giving his back to people at times. And Dolidze is tricky on the mat when he's fresh, especially like in scrambles. Like he finds a way to put you in an uncomfortable situation, and I could see him putting Fluffy in an uncomfortable situation early here. So those will be my 2 fun ones of the card. I think Dolidze submission round 1 plus 4,300 and round 2 plus 5,000. Those are those are the 2 bets I'll target for this fight. And again, I don't know how much people have caught up here, but it feels like people should be caught up by now. But I had nothing on Fluffy's last fight until he was like plus 100 live at one point. And again, this is someone who's minus 400 pre-fight. So if there's a scenario where Dolidze is doing better than expected early, like there could be a buy low opportunity on Hernandez as the fight kind of flips at the, I don't know, call it the 7.5 minute mark where you could maybe make an entry. So I'll be keeping my eyes out for that. Moneyline, I'm not interested, but I think Dolidze is live for an early finish.
I couldn't agree more, my man. And I just wanted people to see this. I'll try and get my my grubby mouse off the screen here so you guys can see this in real time. But essentially, guys, like this is the reaction that Dolidze had to a takedown attempt from Jack Hermanson. And I've done like a whole thread on Dolidze back in the day because I love his grappling, right? So you guys can go watch that if you're interested. But the reason I share it is because if you watch the guy play from his back, he's never settling, right? The guy is constantly moving on the ground and he's entering into legs. And I'll just tell you guys, a lot of MMA fighters are not really familiar with the deep leg entanglements that he's going for, right? So a lot of MMA guys learn leg attacks enough to step out of them, and that's about it, right? Or they learn to hold the leg in place and start punching and these kind of things. And with Dolidze, I think he's one of the most creative leg attackers in the UFC. The way he finished Phil Hawes, guys, was like he entered in on the legs and then he went to a modified knee bar when Phil went to do a wrestling response and go to the splits. He kind of just like made him pay for that response. And if you watch the Jack Hermanson fight, he again takes the response that Jack had given him, right? He's on the ground. He's looking for a deep half guard situation. Jack tries to reach back, loses his whizzer, and then he pulls him back over the top. I've never seen a really good grappler rendered as defenseless as Jack Hermanson was in that moment, guys. He's in a belly down calf slicer covering his head as this dude is just fully leveraged ground and pound from his back. That's brutal. And there's just very few guys that can do that. So I look at all that and I say, Dolidze by sub 16-1. I had to have that, and I'm severely limited at that book. So, it's not a track bet. If I track it, it'll be something like whatever the market wide number is at the time. But point being is just like, I saw the exact same thing you saw, which is number one, he had, first of all, Marcus Maluko Perez, let's be very fucking clear, guys. He's 2-5 in the UFC. He's one of the worst ever doing it in the UFC. God bless him for it. Went out there and fought his heart out. He was not very good. I think Dalcha Lungiambula, one of his only wins, I think, was against him. Not very good. And you look at this, it's like, he submitted him. And it was a while ago, I'll grant that. There's no similar loss that you could find on Roman Dolidze's resume. It just hasn't happened, right? Every guy he's lost to in the UFC had 7 or more UFC wins. So Anthony does fit the bill, right? He's got 8 wins in the promotion. Hats off to him. But on the other side, Dolidze, he lost to Trevin Giles way back in the day. He lost to Nasruddin Imavov. That's a fucking solid-ass guy. It's like, and then Vettori, who he avenged that over 5 rounds. And by the way, I thought he won the fight the first time they fought. Vettori landed more leg kicks. Dolidze walked him down with big boxing shots, and they didn't give him much credit. So I think that Dolidze, like, the longer the fight goes, the less it's in his favor. But I'll just be honest, man. Like, do I see it as impossible that Dolidze banks 3 rounds here and wins the fight via decision? I don't think that's impossible either. I really don't. Just because I've seen Fluffy not get free takedowns on enough guys. Like, I know that he can push the pace. I know he can do that. But if he's not getting to the takedowns, is he at such a huge advantage? For me, I think it's an open question. He throws a lot of boxing combinations. He goes to the body. He does a lot of things right, but he's there to be hit too. And I think that you can't be as wild and reckless as you are against MAB, against Dolidze, or you might take one to the ribs and then the whole fight's over, So that's my take on the fight, man. I think Dolidze dangerous early, and I think he's more dangerous by sub than the prices let on. There you have it, guys. That's everything from us. Andrew, if there's anything you want to shout out, anything you want to tell the people about, the floor is yours, my friend. I appreciate you coming on. It was a pleasure and a blast from the past, so to speak. So, my man, it was nothing but fun for me.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, we could do it again sometime soon. I got nothing to shout out. I'm Bets and Picks MMA on Twitter. You guys make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
It would be a pleasure, brother. You're always welcome at any time. Everybody appreciates you coming on as well, I'm sure, from the chat. Sharpest chat in the game. Thank you all so much for being here. God bless you all. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the breakdowns. If you have questions, comments, concerns, anything else that you have for me, go ahead and fire that off in the comment section down below. I appreciate it, and I'll try and get back to everybody as well before fight time tomorrow. But that's all we got for you guys today. God bless. Good luck. Enjoy the fights. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Take care, everybody.